Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're cracking open the source material on a really fascinating group. Tiny, really, but their impact huge. Radically influenced revolutionary thought, art, protest, you name it.
We're talking about the Situationist International, or the SI.
Exactly, the SI. And these guys, they declared war not just on capitalism, which you might expect, but on boredom, on advertising, even bad architecture, bad housing developments, basically anything they felt made modern life empty or alienating.
That's absolutely right. Our focus is the SI, active roughly, let's say, 1957 to 1972. And you have to understand, they were maybe the most demanding, ideologically pure, rigorously challenging revolutionary group of that whole era.
How demanding are we talking?
Think extremely small. They rarely had more than maybe 10 core members at any one time. But their ambition, it was nothing less than a total critique and a, quote, revolutionary supersession of contemporary society.
Wow. That's some serious ambition for such a tiny group. Did they actually think they could pull it off? Fundamentally change society?
They did. But, their mission wasn't really about writing books or manifestos just to be recognized by academics. No, their goal was to realize revolutionary poetry in life itself, to actually transform lived experience.
Okay, transform lived experience. How?
Well, crucially, they believed the knowledge needed for this revolution wasn't something they had to invent. They thought it was already in suspension in the entire population. Latent, you could say.
So they weren't teachers then?
Not in the traditional sense. They saw themselves more as catalysts, sparking something that was already there.
Okay, if they're the catalyst, we need to understand the chemical compound they were trying to set off. Our source material keeps pointing to their main enemy, the spectacle commodity economy. Now that sounds pretty dense, philosophically speaking.
It is, yeah.
What exactly is the spectacle, and how did they see it, controlling us?
Right. So the spectacle, it's way more than just TV or ads, so that's part of it. For the SI, it's a materialized worldview. It's that stage of capitalism where human relationships aren't direct anymore. They're mediated.
Mediated by?
By images, primarily. By commodities. By passive consumption. Life lived at one remove.
So it's not just that I buy, say, a new phone, it's that I buy the image the phone gives me. And that image somehow replaces a real interaction I might have had.
Yeah, exactly. You've got it. The spectacle constantly reduces reality down to representation.
Yeah.
Things become more real as images than they are in themselves. And the core mechanism behind this, they argued, was what they called universal hierarchization.
Universal hierarchization, okay.
Yeah, and this ties into reifying people. Hold on, let's break that down. When the SI talks about reifying living persons, the simplest way to think about it is, it's the process of turning fluid, complex, messy human beings and relationships into cold, static objects, like commodities you can label and sell.
Turning people into things.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And how did this whole image mediation thing lead to problems like racism, which they said was being engendered everywhere by the spectacle?
Yeah, that connection isn't immediately obvious. Are they saying racism is just like a side effect of shopping hierarchies?
It's a bit more complex. They argued that when all social value and relationships get filtered through images and status through what you consume, what you represent, it naturally creates systems of ranking and exclusion, universal categorization.
Okay.
So, if your worth is tied to consuming things, what happens to those who can't consume? They're marginalized. They get slotted into the spectacle too, but as negative images, justifying why they're excluded. The whole structure freezes people into these roles. It makes the past, these old hierarchies, dominate the present.
That really is a total critique, isn't it? And this whole structure, the spectacle, it leads directly, according to the sources, to that feeling of deep dissatisfaction in everyday life.
Precisely. They looked around at this supposedly comfortable, affluent post-war society, and they saw this glaring contradiction. You had political action, revolutions happening maybe elsewhere, but daily life itself, the immediate reality for most people, it felt stuck, conservative, paralyzingly boring, just lacking any real, authentic creativity.
So it sounds like they thought the biggest enemy wasn't necessarily the state police, but more like the Monday to Friday grind.
Yeah.
Watching TV passively, the sheer boredom of a Sunday afternoon.
Fundamentally, yes.
Yeah.
And this all stems, for them, from alienated labor.
Yeah.
They drew heavily on Marx here, the observation that the worker only feels truly themselves, truly human, when they're not working.
Right, that separation from your own actions, your own creations.
Exactly, and that split permeates everything else. It creates this deep, nagging dissatisfaction. Even if you're materially well off, you might have comfort, sure, but you don't have genuine fulfillment.
And they looked for moments where this alienation, this dissatisfaction actually burst through, didn't they? The Watts Rebellion in LA in 1965, that was a key example for them.
It's a fantastic anecdote. It really shows their theory connecting with real events. The SI looked at the looting during the uprising, but they focused on acts that seemed, well, irrational from a purely economic standpoint. Like the looting of big household appliances. Refrigerators, specifically, often by people who didn't even have electricity or whose power was cut off right after.
Stealing a fridge you can't plug in, that is odd. It's not just about needing something.
Exactly. That's what interested them. It showed, they argued, that the lie of affluence was transformed into a truth in play. Taking that fridge, or sometimes even just smashing it, was a rejection of its commodity value, its exchange value.
It wasn't about the price tag.
Right. The looters were effectively saying, we don't care about the status this object represents in your system. We're asserting something else. A human superiority over commodities, as they put it.
Asserting their own desire, maybe even just their anger over the logic of the market.
And that leads to that key quote from the sources. Comfort will never be comfortable enough for those who seek what is not on the market. That spontaneous act, whether taking or destroying, outside of economic sense that became, for the SI, a powerful active critique of the spectacle.
Okay, so if the spectacle is the enemy, and the goal is creating these revolutionary moments, these situations, their weapons couldn't be conventional guns or bombs. They needed conceptual tools, right, to break that passive trance.
Exactly. Tools to wake people up to their own lives.
And the first famous one is the derive, the drift.
The drift, yes. Defined in the texts as a kind of spontaneous, passional journey out of the ordinary through a rapid changing of ambiences.
Okay, honestly, that sounds a bit like just going for a long, interesting walk.
Yeah.
How is a derive different from being a tourist or that classic Parisian figure, the flaneur, the stroller?
That's the crucial difference they insisted on. The flaneur is mostly a passive observer, often drawn to the commercial buzz. The derive, however, is meant to be non-commercial and actively analytical.
Analytical.
Its goal is what they called psychogeographical study. Basically, mapping how the physical environment, the streets, the buildings, the atmosphere, directly affects your emotions and your behavior. You're trying to become aware of how the city is pushing you around, guiding your feelings, usually towards consumption or work.
So it's like aimless wandering, but with a very specific anti-capitalist purpose, trying to feel the invisible walls.
You got it. It's a deliberate exercise in breaking free from the prepackaged roads of life.
And naturally, the spectacle, the sort of institutionalized dullness, fights back against this kind of playfulness.
Oh, absolutely. They love pointing out absurd examples of this. My favorite from the sources is the sign they found in the Jardin des Plantes labyrinth in Paris. It apparently read, "No playing in the labyrinth."
No playing in the labyrinth at the one place designed for getting lost and having fun.
Precisely. The absurdity of regulating spontaneity.
So beyond just wandering, they wanted to actually remake the environment itself. Which brings us to their ideas on architecture. Unitary urbanism.
Right. Unitary urbanism wasn't just city planning. They thought traditional planning was basically a specialized lie, just managing flows of workers and shoppers. Their goal was much bigger, the construction of situations. Through creating entirely new ambiences, new feelings in the city shouldn't control you. It should enable play and interaction.
And some of their early thinkers had these incredibly, utopian, almost psychedelic visions for what architecture could do. Ivan Checheglov, for instance.
Oh, Chechglov's vision was total. He dreamed of architecture creating rooms more conducive to dreams than any drug. Imagine that. Or houses where one cannot help but love. The environment itself shaping consciousness and emotion.
That's ambitious.
That's why they found the idea of just trying to humanize housing developments so ridiculous. For them, it was like trying to humanize atomic war.
Yeah.
You can't just put slightly nicer curtains on oppression and call it fixed.
Total rejection of just tinkering around the edges. And this connects to the Dutch architect, Constant, right? And his new Babylon project.
Yes, Constant Nieuwenhuis. His new Babylon was this huge, sprawling conceptual project. It wasn't practical blueprints. It was more like a vision. A city of vast, interconnected, constantly changing structures.
Designed for what?
Designed specifically to turn everyday life into an endless experimental drift. It was meant to be the physical embodiment of the derive on a massive scale. A city built purely for play, creativity, and constant transformation.
An entire world built for drifting. But Constant didn't stay with the SI, did he? There was a split.
He was expelled, actually, and it's a perfect illustration of how incredibly rigorous, maybe even ruthless, the SI was organizationally.
Why? What happened?
Constance started exhibiting his new Babylon designs in traditional art galleries, museums, and the SI saw this as him slipping back into the role of the specialized artist. Just another producer for the cultural spectacle.
Even though it was their idea he was promoting.
Didn't matter. He compromised the principle of rejecting specialized roles within the system. For the SI, their revolutionary purity, their total critique, was more important than even their most famous architectural vision. He became a star, and that violated their principles.
Wow. Okay, that's
But-
commitment, or maybe self-sabotage, depending on how you look at it. That intense rigor leads us to their third big conceptual weapon.
Détournement.
Détournement. Yeah, it basically means subversion through reuse, or hijacking maybe. It's the reuse of pre-existing artistic elements in a new ensemble, taking bits of the spectacle ads, comics, films, and twisting them.
How? To what end?
The goal is to strip the original media of its intended ideological message. You turn its own language, its own images against itself to reveal the alienation or manipulation underneath. It's systematic appropriation as a weapon.
So if they were active today, would détournement just be like making edgy memes? Huh? That's actually a pretty good analogy in some ways.
Hmm.
But the SI's concept of détournement was maybe more rigorous, more consciously theoretical. A meme can be just a quick joke. They aimed for a deeper, more jarring restructuring of the source material that forced you to see the original in a critical light. It had to be aggressive.
Aggressive. Give us some concrete examples from their time.
Well, they famously repurposed advertising posters, especially in the Paris metro tunnels. They'd stick on new speech bubbles with subversive messages, turning consumer slogans into revolutionary demand.
Right, hijacking the ad space.
Exactly. They also talked about taking things like cheesy photo love stories from magazines or even pornographic photos and writing new, true dialogue over them. Dialogue that would reveal the real emptiness or manipulation behind the glossy image.
And cinema, too.
Oh, yeah. The classic example they gave was taking a technically brilliant but frankly horribly racist film like D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation.
Yeah.
They said you could deturn it by keeping the innovative visuals, but just adding a completely new soundtrack that denounces its message, that critiques it relentlessly. Use the spectacle's own power against itself.
That kind of take-no-prisoners attitude must have shaped their whole organizational philosophy. The same philosophy that got Constant kicked out.
Absolutely. They demanded constant critical rigor. Any hint of compromise, any acceptance by mainstream society, any ideological comfort zone that was seen as a shameful defeat. They were constantly purging members, keeping the core incredibly tight and ideologically pure.
Which explains their anti-star principle.
Precisely. You couldn't be in the SI and also pursue personal fame or maintain a comfortable, socially approved role. If you started becoming a recognized star, a famous artist, a well-regarded writer, accepted by the establishment, you were out.
Because that meant you'd been absorbed by the spectacle.
Exactly. It reinforced the very system they were trying to destroy.
Okay.
They believed this absolute rigor was essential to link their revolutionary theory directly to what they called critique in acts. Theory had to be lived uncompromisingly.
But doesn't that sound, I don't know, incredibly self-defeating? If you kick out anyone who starts getting influential, how do your ideas ever actually spread beyond this tiny, super intense group?
That's the paradox, isn't it? But they saw the organization itself as just a temporary tool, not the end goal. Their real focus, they claimed, was on empowering the new proletariat.
Which wasn't just factory workers for them, right?
No, it was much broader. It included anyone, regardless of traditional class, who consciously or unconsciously rejected forced labor and the spectacle. Artists, students, intellectuals, workers, anyone alienated. They believed the raw power of the idea itself, kept pure, was the real weapon. If a situationist became a celebrity, the idea died, co-opted. They were banking on the idea spreading almost virally, spontaneously.
And you could argue that spontaneous spread kind of reached its peak in May 1968 in France. That was the big moment, wasn't it? When their theory seemed to explode into action.
May 68 was definitely a crucial test, a moment of validation for them. Even though the SI group itself was still minuscule, their ideas, especially the critiques of alienation and consumerism, maybe popularized through Raoul Vaillam's work on student life, had definitely seeped into the radical student and intellectual scenes.
So when the students took over the Sorbonne,
The SI was right there, involved in the occupation committee, and they were absolutely clear about what needed to happen next.
No compromises, I assume.
None. They issued this really influential communique demanding the immediate occupation of all the factories in France and the formation of workers' councils. That was their ultimate political vision taking shape.
The Workers' Council, let's clarify that. How is that different from, say, a Communist Party taking over or even a Leninist-style vanguard party?
That's the absolute key distinction for them. They fiercely rejected any centralized hierarchical party ruling for the people. They saw that as just swapping one form of oppressive bureaucracy capitalist for another state bureaucratic.
So what was the alternative?
For the SI, the Workers' Council, meaning sovereign, rank-and-file general assemblies, was the only political form that could actually achieve the economic emancipation of labor. It had to be completely bottom-up, direct democracy in the workplace and the community.
All power held directly by the assemblies themselves, not delegated away to some permanent leadership or party structure.
Exactly. Total autonomy, direct control.
Looking back now, it's undeniable. The Situationist International's influence seems way bigger than their tiny numbers or short lifespan would suggest.
Oh, absolutely. I think their most profound contribution was really shifting the focus of critique. They showed how the crisis of modern life, that feeling of boredom, alienation, the hollowness of consumerism, wasn't separate from the crisis of capitalism. They were interwoven.
And their critique was so comprehensive.
It really was. It spanned space, with unitary urbanism challenging how cities control us. It spanned time, critiquing the division between alienated work and passive leisure. And it hit subjectivity itself, that internal struggle against boredom and meaninglessness. They tied it all back to this grand, almost Hegelian goal, the realization of human capacities, letting play and creativity finally overcome mere necessity.
But there's a huge kind of dark irony in their legacy, especially when you think about technology. They saw tech as a potential tool for liberation, right?
They absolutely did. They envisioned technology freeing people from drudgery, enabling the free construction of situations, liberating time for that experimental life.
Yet today, many of the very things they foresaw, advanced media, instant communication, powerful data organization, seem like they're mainly used to, well, reinforce police control, as their texts actually warned.
It's true. The spectacle just got smarter, more efficient. It became networked. The very tools that could facilitate a derivative across information landscapes now seem to mostly track us, categorize us, manage us for corporations and states.
The tech that tracks our clicks, our locations, our desires, it's the infrastructure of the modern spectacle. A pretty grim outcome compared to their hopes.
It really is, and maybe the most radical part of their entire project was their prediction about their own end. They explicitly said that if they were truly successful, the Situationist International as an organization would need to be superseded. It would just dissolve.
Dissolve into what?
Into the general population's own autonomous action. They didn't want to build a lasting institution. They wanted the ideas to become so commonplace, so lived, that the specific group pushing them would become totally redundant.
So a final thought for you listening. If the spectacle, in its updated networked form, is still so pervasive, what part of your own everyday life feels like it's still waiting to be reclaimed? What small act of détournement, twisting the everyday, or what personal derive breaking your routine might help you uncover the real desires currently buried under all that passive consumption and the endless scroll? Something to think about.